Sir, you're joining us at a time which is being described as being truly historic by, India-US watchers. So I ended my conversation with Ambassador Nirupama Rao with this question. So I'll begin my conversation with you with that same question. Going by everything that you've seen so far, what, according to you, have been the biggest takeaways from this historic state visit?
I think first, of course, as we discussed in our last conversation, the fact of the state visit, because in that there is already a signal. Before this, the state visit was in 2009 when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh went, and before that in 1963 when Dr. Radhakrishnan, our president, had gone. So you can see the time frame is already being compressed. And beyond the fact of the state visit, I think very deliberate effort made by the US side to send signals to India, to the Indian Prime Minister, about the value of the relationship. So aside from the standard elements of protocol, in terms of the welcome in the South Lawn, the meeting with the president, the state dinner, the private dinner hosted by the Bidens, and then the First Lady joining the Prime Minister for the skills event on 21st itself. Those were also part of the deliberate signaling about the importance that is being attached to the relationship. Now, moving from there, I think the articulations that both did about the nature of the relationship was important. The Prime Minister said that the relationship has passed the test of friendship. And in an interview to a newspaper earlier, he had said now there is unprecedented trust between the leaders of the two countries, or that he agrees with President Biden that this will be one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century. And President Biden himself reiterating that he believes that this will be one of the most consequential partnerships in the world. So certain articulation about where they see the partnership. And finally, you look at the outcomes. The actual outcomes that have come out have been very, very significant and unprecedented. The decision for transfer of jet engine technology, something like that the US has not done so far. And therefore a signal that they have confidence in the Indian relationship and they want to take it in a certain direction. Then the decision that had been made by the private sector US companies about investing in semiconductors in India, by Micron, by Applied Materials, by Lam Research, 3 different companies, looking at assembly and packaging, looking at industrial collaboration, looking at the training of workforce, signal that they have now the confidence to begin participating in the semiconductor ecosystem. And I think they have gained that confidence because they see where the India-US bilateral relationship is headed, and also the effort that India has made in terms of expanding manufacturing in India and creating the framework for supporting such an ecosystem. Now, going beyond that, if you look at defense, several decisions came out that now they are discussing a roadmap for industrial collaboration. So that will enable Indian companies to become a part of the global supply chain of US companies. So that will strengthen defense industrial base in India, and we will be able to export more. And building on that, they have said that they are going to start discussions now on a security of supply arrangement in the area of defense, which would mean that in the event of a crisis, there is no disruption that happens. And also looking at a reciprocal defense procurement agreement. Now that should enable Indian companies to also be able to sell in the US. So these again would serve to deepen the partnership. And I noticed that one important announcement that was made, that the US Department of Defense Space Force has already agreed on a research and collaboration arrangement with 2 Indian startups. Now, for a cutting-edge force like that to begin a partnership with Indian startups, one, it's a signal of confidence in what Indian startups can do, and then it will strengthen the experience that these startups have. So that again became a very important element. And the final element that I noticed was the major decisions in the area of critical and emerging technologies, because the joint statement says that technology will be the defining parameter of the partnership in the years ahead. So in that area, for instance, they've already indicated that there is a joint fund for promoting collaboration in artificial intelligence and quantum, and that 35 innovative projects have been funded for joint research and collaboration in other parts of critical and emerging technologies. So overall, I would say that very important outcomes, which will strengthen the partnership in a longer-term framework, deepen collaboration, and then the whole messaging and atmosphere related to the visit. A signal to the bureaucracies in both countries, signal to the businesses in both countries, signal to academia in both countries. And then beyond that, signal to other countries in the world that this is the direction in which the India-US relationship is headed. And as the Prime Minister has said on several occasions, he believes that this partnership is a force for global good. And US President Biden also said that it will have a beneficial impact at the global level. So that's how they're approaching this partnership. But again, I think although very, very important transformational decisions, achievements have been there, we have to recognize that it has been built on the foundation of the past. And there were several defining parameters. The visit that President Clinton made in 2000, moving away from the sanctions that US imposed on India after the 1998 nuclear test. Then the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement that President Bush did in 2008, opening up avenues for India for access to higher level technologies, defense technologies, dual use technologies. President Obama declaring India a major defense partner, again enabling even higher level defense technologies. And President Trump placing India at strategic trade authorization level 1, same level of technology releases as NATO partners of the US. So step by step through different phases, we came to the point where another leap was possible. And certainly that leap has now been taken through decisions in the context of this visit.
Absolutely. This is a relationship that has been built on the foundations that have been laid in the past. You couldn't have said it better, sir. Now, of course, the one area that has seen the biggest breakthroughs and path-breaking deals is that of defense ties and technology cooperation. You referred to that. The deal for the joint manufacture of GE F414 fighter jet engines and the significant transfer of technology that comes with it is being termed a trailblazing initiative. This is in the words of the Foreign Secretary. This, as we know, is the first time that the US is sharing such technology with a non-ally. They call it the crown jewel of their defense production. It's also been called a game changer. Do you believe it is a real game changer?
It is, but then we have to understand why it is happening. For example, a similar attempt was made in 2014 when the two countries had launched the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative. And there too, the idea of collaborating in jet engine technology was discussed. And it didn't go through. It didn't go through because the US government at that stage was not ready to authorize the level of technology transfer that India was interested in. And the US company concerned did not find it profitable to partner with an Indian entity for co-production at that stage. Now, both parameters have changed. The US government is now ready to authorize that kind of technology transfer, and the US company finds it worthwhile for them. But this has again happened because since 2014, if you see, several steps have been taken to deepen the defense partnership. In 2016, President Obama declared India a major defense partner. Therefore, one signal that we want to take the relation to another level. And then I spoke to you about what President Trump did in terms of STA-1 authorization. But again, in 2016, India and the US signed what was called LEMOA, Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement. Basically, a logistics support agreement where, with the case-by-case approval, the armed forces of each country could draw upon the logistics support of the other. So that was very significant. This was something that had been discussed for years, but had not worked out. But that went through. In 2018, again, something that had been discussed for years, but had not come through, was finalized, which was the Communication Compatibility and Security Agreement. Now, that enabled higher technology communication equipment to be shared between the two countries, to be supplied to India, and enhance the communication levels and secrecy of that communication between the armed forces of the two countries when they were operating, for example, on the seas and in the international context. And then eventually in 2020, the two countries signed BECA, the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, which enabled sharing of geospatial information. And that, I understand, was something very helpful when the US shared information and intelligence with India in the context of what was happening in Galwan. So very fundamental agreements related to defense were signed between the two countries. India and the US have also now been doing more and more military exercises with each other. They do army exercises, air force exercises, naval exercises, special forces exercises, tri-services exercises, multilateral exercises like the Malabar series and others. And these exercises have been increasing in complexity and, as many have said, building towards interoperability. And that has enhanced confidence between the armed forces of the two countries in terms of the partnership they can have, including, for example, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and other areas. The US now does more military exercises with India than with any country outside NATO. And India, again, does more military exercises with the US than with any other country. So with all this happening, there's a much higher level of confidence between the defense establishments of the two countries. And that has also enabled the authorization of technology transfer for something like the GEF 414 jet engine. But I think the final point here is that, again, as we discussed last time, every US president has played a personal role, as has every Indian Prime Minister, in advancing the relationship. And even where the jet engine technology was being considered, as reports came out, when the initial processing began, there was some opposition in the US system, in the Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, Department of State, elsewhere, because something like this had never been done. And again, from what reports suggest, it was the US National Security Council, the White House, and the President who gave a clear message that they wanted this to be done. They wanted to take the partnership with India to another level. And that is really what has enabled this to come about. And now, of course, it's something new, something transformational. It will help build or start the process of building an ecosystem in India for partnering in this level of technology, and would have spin-off effect for us for building our defense industrial base. So now the challenge really is that with this happening, how do we consolidate our own strength further in terms of defense production and defense technology?
Right. Now, of course, some of these measures have taken the relationship to the next level, and there is no doubt that this bilateral relationship is independent of any other country or any other external factor. But we do know that the United States has been quite keen to wean India off its heavy dependence on Russian weapon supplies. With the US finally opening the door of technology transfer for India, among other things, do you think it's taken a big step forward in that direction? Of course, India maintains it will not compromise on its strategic autonomy. But do you already see some sort of a shift given this level of engagement now between India and the United States?
Look, each country takes its decisions in its own interest. Now, India would certainly like to wean the United States away from Pakistan.
Yes.
But that doesn't work because the US will deal with Pakistan in its own interest. And despite the fact that, you're looking at the kind of interest that the US has in India in terms of trade, technology, investment, the diaspora relationship, they still maintain a certain relationship with Pakistan. And they maintain a relationship with Pakistan because Pakistan has nuclear weapons, because the US would like some continued counterterrorism support from Pakistan. US flies drones over Pakistan on way to Afghanistan for counterterrorism purposes. So they need access to Pakistan. So for their own reasons, they will maintain a certain relationship with Pakistan. And recently they authorized a $450 million sustainment package for the F-16s with Pakistan, which they've used against India. So similarly, India will build its relationship with the US, keeping in mind its own interests in trade, interests in technology, interest in terms of what is the investments, Indian students who want to study there, Indians who want to go and work there. So if you look at India's comprehensive national interest, factoring in all these dimensions, US is India's most important partner. So you build that. But at the same time, you sustain the relationship with Russia, keeping in mind your interests. So it's not a question of weaning away. And there's a legacy defense relationship. Almost 60% of our defense inventory is still of Russian origin. And when we had the Russia-Ukraine crisis, given the global energy situation, India increased its purchases of Russian oil because earlier what India was getting from the Gulf was being taken away now by the European countries who are reducing their purchases from Russia. So India will maintain the kind of relationship that it believes is in its own interest. And again, there remains the basic parameter that because of its difficulties with the US and Europe, Russia is getting more and more dependent on China. And you would like to prevent Russia from going over to China on India-China issues. And from the Russian perspective, you've seen Russian leaders, including their ambassador here, articulate that Russia also would not like to become too dependent on one country. They would also like options. So you have to play this in a delicate way so that you maintain each relationship as it works for your interest. And I believe India's interest in the framework of multipolar contestation today lies in deepening with the US, sustaining with Russia, and strengthening itself to deal with the challenge from China.
Well, it certainly is a complex geopolitical scenario, but that's always the case. Since you mentioned Pakistan, I want to ask you this. Without naming Pakistan, Prime Minister Modi, in his address to the US Congress, said, even 2 decades after 9/11 and a decade after 26/11, terrorism remains a pressing global challenge. It is the enemy of humanity, and there can be no ifs and buts in dealing with it. Now, we know that there has been a lot of heartburn for New Delhi over America's close military ties with Pakistan, and as I cited this example earlier, America providing F-16s to Pakistan, for instance. But do you believe that equation still remains intact, or has it considerably changed in the last 2 years since the withdrawal of the US and NATO troops from Afghanistan? I put this question to Ambassador Nirupama Rao, and she says she believes that Pakistan-US equation has now completely changed.
No, I think it has changed completely. I remember before the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement had been done, and that was the time when the US was even more dependent on Pakistan because it was heavily engaged in Afghanistan. And at that time, dealing with the US, I used to get the sense that very often in moving forward with India, the US officials would often wonder what kind of impact will it have on Pakistan? And sometimes that condition their thinking. Today, I think the situation is completely different. When doing anything with Pakistan, they wonder that will it have any impact on the India relationship? So I think that is the major transformation that has happened. The India-US relationship is today at a completely different league. There has been a dehyphenation of the India-Pakistan relationship and the building on the India relationship for the strengths and the bilateral opportunities that this provides. But then again, for their interests that I explained to you earlier, they will remain engaged with Pakistan and they will have access to Pakistan. Now, for example, from our perspective, we want to hedge, we want to have options, we want to maintain relations with Russia while deepening with the US. Similarly, we have to acknowledge the other countries also who are deepening relations with us will want to maintain some relations with Pakistan. So our effort has to be to ensure that that doesn't impact negatively on us. And so that's the effort that must continue. For example, way back in 2016, at a time when we had very good relations with the US, and President Obama had come to India in 2015, declared support, as chief guest on Republic Day, and earlier declared support for India's permanent membership of UN Security Council. But in 2016, he authorized the supply of 18 F-16s to Pakistan. Because the US at that stage needed some help from Pakistan in the context of the Taliban. And it was the US Congress, based on the very active lobbying that had been done by us, that blocked that sale to Pakistan. So yeah, the US administration has certain compulsions, and I think India, as the relationship with the US deepens, must work with various stakeholders invested in the India relationship to preserve and protect its interests in terms of US policy making.
Right. We've talked about Pakistan. Another country we can't avoid talking about is China. You and I discussed it last time, and we will have to talk about it again. Now, in his address to the US Congress, Prime Minister Modi said, again without taking any names, he said the dark clouds of coercion and confrontation are casting their shadow in the Indo Pacific. The stability of the region has become one of the central concerns of our partnership. We share a vision of a free, open, and inclusive Indo Pacific, which is free from domination. Now, we know that there are shared concerns over China's revisionism and hegemony. How do you think the two leaders would have addressed this issue when they were in that room holding those talks yesterday? And I asked you this earlier, I will ask you this again. Do you believe the US sees India as a countervailing force against China?
Of course they do, and but that's not the only factor in the US-India relationship. As we discussed, there are sufficient opportunities in the bilateral relationship for the US to find engagement with India very, very helpful. But the China challenge to the US presents an additional factor for deepening the relationship, and that has been there since 2000. In 2000, President Bush, in his election campaign, said that China was a strategic competitor. And many have argued that one of the reasons he did the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement was to start the process of building the US-India relationship. And as they say, contribute to the strengthening of India, because they believe that a stronger India on its own will be a deterrent against China, even if it's not overtly anti-China. And since then, US and Indian leaders have continuously had conversation about China, the kind of challenges that it poses, what needs to be done. And I'm sure, therefore, there would be assessment at this stage about how the US seeing the challenges from China, its relations with China. The US Secretary of State was recently in China. And of course, we have our own challenges with China along the LSE. And the increasing Chinese activity in South Asia, in the Indian Ocean region. So there's enough to talk about, and enough of the challenges that are there, which provides an additional convergence in terms of the interests and opportunities for the two countries.
All right. Let me ask you this, sir. In the New World Order, some might argue that there are these two poles called the United States and China, though Ambassador Nirupama Rao differed with me on this. She said, no, it's not a bipolar world anymore, it is a multipolar world. But for argument's sake, if we were to look at the US and China as two poles, they have intertwined economies, but we know of this great power rivalry that exists. Where does India figure in this complex geopolitical equation? Also, could Moscow's growing proximity to Beijing make New Delhi somewhat wary of Moscow going forward, despite the long-standing relationship the two have enjoyed for decades now? This is something you did refer to, in fact.
So I think India has to continue making efforts with Russia to keep sustaining or building the partnership where it can. The energy partnership. India has made earlier investments in Sakhalin. In energy, which I understand have worked out very well for Indian companies. And of course, we have the defense partnership. So, you can't place all your bets in one basket. You have to have options, because suddenly if where you're placing bets, their compulsion change. You must have other options. So I think that's the kind of strategy that I believe India has been following consistently. And it's also being done now.
All right. I, wonder what you made of President Biden calling Xi Jinping a dictator. And he was even asked by a journalist whether he regretted making that statement, because some had said that he'd gone off script. We know that the Chinese Foreign Ministry reacted to it quite angrily, calling it utterly irresponsible and a gross violation of diplomatic protocol. But actually, President Biden stuck to his guns. And he said, no, I do not really intend to revise any remark that I have made. I wonder what you made of that.
Well, President Biden will have his own assessments, but I understand that a communist structure, by definition, is an authoritarian structure. So there are obvious implications for that in terms of the nature of governance and decision making.
Right. Of course, the timing was interesting because this remark came close on the heels of Antony Blinken's visit to Beijing. But coming back to the India US relationship. Now, Prime Minister Modi said earlier, we are neutral. Is what people say, but we're not neutral. We're actually on the side of peace. This was said in the context of the Russia Ukraine war. Again, while addressing the US Congress, he said this is not an era of war and all sides must do everything possible to restore peace, and dialogue and diplomacy can be the only way forward. But, we've talked about how the Russia-Ukraine war continues to be an area of divergence for India and the United States. Also, the fact that India has continued to import oil from Russia. Do you think, sir, that the United States has more or less reconciled itself to this divergence of views? I mean, given the kind of optics we've seen in the last couple of days, the US pretty much rolling out the red carpet for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, despite the fact that India has received criticism over its Russia policy in the last 1 year.
So I think the administration has expressed understanding for India's compulsions and position. And as I mentioned, we have a legacy relationship. We have to ensure energy security, and they have said, that the India's relations with Russia developed at a time when US was not willing to be that kind of a partner, or that with India they're playing the long game. So they understand India's compulsions, and then they know, and I think everybody understands that India is very firm in making its own decisions based on its own interests. And you have to build a partnership based on where convergence is. And then again, from the US perspective, if you look at it, some of its closest allies and partners, Israel has not gone along with the US position on Russia. Turkey, which is a member of NATO, has not gone along with the US position on Russia. Hungary, which is also a member of NATO, has not gone along with the US position on Russia. So they understand that different countries, for their own reasons, have defined themselves on the Ukraine issue somewhat different from the US position. And that's in the nature of things, and they're accepting that.
All right. Final question, sir, before we let you go, because this is something that affects a very large number of Indians. The visa delays have been a major irritant in the India-US relationship in the last few years. Now, we've been told that the H-1B visa rules are going to be tweaked. That is likely to help a very large number of Indians. But do you believe that we can expect some significant forward movement on that front?
Well, what they're talking about is allowing the visa processing and stamping to be done within the country, and not expecting the visa holder to travel outside to get the fresh visa. If that happens, it will certainly be a convenience. And it would be welcome, because otherwise they had to go out of the US to different countries, wait there while the visa was being processed. So it was certainly an inconvenience that they were being subjected to. So if that is changed, it will certainly be for the better.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Arun Singh, for joining us and sharing with us your views on those bilateral talks that took place between President Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and how you believe the India-US relationship is now shaping up. Thank you very much, sir, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Neha.